Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Hamilton. I'm the chair of Identity North, and welcome to today's Identity North Lunch and Learn. Wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, hopefully you are having lunch with us. For those of you that are new to Identity North, as you can probably deduce, we founded Identity North and assigned it this logo with one plan in mind. We want to help people to map out the emerging and complex world of digital identity and ultimately to navigate their own path through it. Of course, Identity North doesn't stand on its own as a topic. It's highly related to data privacy and security, online service delivery, biometrics, identity and access management, consumer identity, cyber risk, cybersecurity, the Internet of Things. Like the whole digital economy ultimately, comes together under this gathering of Identity North. We cover these topics and a bunch more. And our goals are, number one, to educate and inspire Canadians with a sense of the new opportunities that are just around the corner. As digital ID becomes an important part of our lives, we see a huge opportunity to grow the economy by building literacy around the ideas of digital ID and privacy and the emergence of the digital economy. And we want to connect folks. So we want to guide Canadians into a bigger, broader set of discussions and activities around digital ID and its applications, and we can't work together if we don't know each other. And number three, we want to support world-class companies, especially Canadian companies, as they look to gain profile in projects and opportunities across Canada, around the world, and we want to help create a globally recognized hub of excellence right here in Canada. And so, we have arranged, for the first time actually, we've arranged the dates for the whole next year calendar events in advance. All of which are going to be taking place virtually. Unfortunately, we're hoping we're going to be able to get back on track with in-person events in 2022, or at least hybrid events, that kind of thing. But for now, we're going to have to stick with virtual. So the winter workshop is going to be held February 17th and 18th, 2021. The annual summit will be taking place in June 2nd and 3rd. That fall symposium on October 20th and 21st. And you can register today for all of those upcoming events on identitynorth.ca. I should tell you that the early bird pricing ends on December 31st, so the next event. So as you're ticking down the clock on New Year's evening, I want you to be sure and think about me and Krista and the whole gang here at Identity North and make sure that you've registered. So New Year's Eve, well, I won't be sad to see the end of 2020. But to be honest, I wasn't really prepared for this year, and I'm not really sure how to prepare for 2021 either. So this pandemic year has brought a lot of new challenges for organizations, and we're all learning to navigate through them. Unfortunately, we've already seen a great number of organizations like healthcare service companies, local and municipal governments unprepared for this new level of online service delivery, and we all need to better equip ourselves for the future ahead. My name is Aaron Hamilton. I'm the chair of Identity North. Joining me here today is Chief Evangelist Allan Foster and the Vice President of Global Cloud Enablement, Renee Beckloff, from the ForgeRock team. They're joining us virtually from sunny and warm San Francisco. The 22-degree weather that they're enjoying right now is not in Fahrenheit, that's in centigrade. And for those of you that are here in Toronto with me, you're experiencing -6. So we won't take too much teasing from those guys down there. But Renee, Allan, it's a pleasure to have both of you here with us today.
Thanks for having me. And yes, it's a balmy 22, but I did wear a sweater in honor of this meeting today.
And thank you, Aaron. And just want to point out that I'm in the original Vancouver, not in San Francisco.
Yeah. I'm actually in Southern California. Our office is in San Francisco. And yes, San Andreas, I can look out my window and see the San Andreas fault from where I'm at. So agreed, there are some give and takes here.
All right, well, stay safe. And let us know if you have to go suddenly. So I'm going to moderate today's session, and I'm going to invite all the participants to submit questions through the Q&A function. I'm going to raise them as we go along, and I want to dive a little deeper into the discussion around making choices and setting plans for the year or years ahead, because we're trying to make decisions for 2021 It's going to be a year of COVID-related challenges, let's be honest. We also need to prepare for the new normal. This can be, let's be honest, a lot of us need to prepare for doing transactions online more than in face-to-face, not just through 2021, but I think we're now setting new expectations for how we can behave and how we can interact with each other. And I know I won't be traveling as much in the future, and I'm probably, going to increasingly just try to do all my banking online, even the things that I still go into the bank for. And I know there's more things. All my healthcare, I know as much as I can do. I've been doing remote doctor visits here. Not much identity verification or validation in any way, shape, or form right now. So there's a bunch of things that I think we need to look into. But what do you think is the number one driver of change, for us right now, Renee? What is driving all of this change that we're going through?
Well, I think that overall, there's this idea that we always progress forward, but there is no way that I believe anyone would have predicted that literally overnight, the global economy would go from a brick and mortar economy to a virtually complete digital economy, just overnight. We've seen progressions in different markets, the Amazons, the, whatnot. We've done that. But if you had told me in March, even February, that I was going to be conducting all of my doctor visits over, electronically, unless there was some test I needed done, I never would have believed you. If you had told me that my mother would not be going to the bank to see her favorite teller and give her check, I never would. There's just no way any of us in this industry would have comprehended that. And the idea that people had to scramble, I was speaking with one of our banking customers, and when they switched, they literally went from an 80% brick and mortar, 20% online, and immediately flipped that in less than 24 hours. And that's a heavy lift for companies that have been traditionally on-prem or traditionally a brick and mortar company that are looking at a small subset of their customer base needing it. So really, COVID has been the driver. Obviously, security as well, because as we move to a digital economy, so are the bad guys. So I think that it's a combination. From my perspective, this has completely shifted us, and we're not going back. This is normal now. There will not be going back.
It's easier said than done, right? Though, because migrating to electronic service delivery is not easy to pull off. Yeah. And there's a lot of ways that it can go poorly. And let's just point out a couple here. So in November, just last month, the city of St. John, New Brunswick experienced a ransomware attack. Officials have declined to say how much was demanded or what systems were affected. The city has stated that they don't believe that there's evidence. There's no evidence that anyone's personal information was stolen. Let me say that very clearly. The city has stated no evidence that anyone's personal information was stolen. That said, the city's website still remains down, and online payments are still not possible. A month later, in April of last year, the Ontario City of Stratford experienced a ransomware attack. Hackers accessed their system, encrypted the data, and demanded a ransom of 75 grand. And of course, there's nothing going on the news right now aside from COVID and the massive attacks that we're just learning about that the U.S. government has been under a fairly sustained attack. And so, and it's not just provincial municipal governments and not just the U.S. government. It's healthcare and financial services companies and other organizations that are usually dealing with customers that walk in and transact face-to-face, but then have to move with the times. So, Allan, customers in this case, they're the citizens, right? They're not just looking for more convenient services, right? Are they? They're looking for different experiences than we've ever been able to give.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about your comment about 2020, right? Because in natural disasters, we have this habit of having disaster preparedness. We do something and we try and react to it and see how we would respond. How long has it been that those of us in the security and the identity space have been, telling industry this is important, we have to deal with this, And suddenly 2020 comes on as being okay, let's try out and see how we've done. Some places have done very well. Other ones have not responded terribly well to the challenge. And so, when we start looking at users, right, the people ultimately that we're trying to solve, the reality is they aren't really looking for a login experience. They are looking to go to the bank or to renew their car tabs or something, whatever it is they're trying to deal with. And if it's a pain in the neck to do, one of the examples I have this weekend, I have an old cell phone. I'm lucky enough, I've upgraded to the new iPhone. So I have an old one. It turns out that there is no online way to get that off of your account with my carrier. The only way to do that is I have to physically phone them, apologize to them that I want to remove it off my account, and then have them work with that. That made me frustrated, so much so that I actually went through the whole process of saying, wow, I wonder whether this is easier somewhere else. Right? We want to be able to get our job done. We want those experiences not to get in the way, and we want to feel that the online experience that we've all been forced into in the last 12 months, right, let's call it a year, the online experience we've been forced into is our new normal, and we want to be able to do things without getting frustrated.
And basically, any opportunity that you don't take to remove these opportunities for the people to go, well, maybe I should check out the other guys. Like, you just need to remove that from any of your processes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think of the process of why people don't want to buy a new car, and I'm not denigrating new car salesmen, right? But there's this whole thing, there's a process that you don't want to go through. The last car that I bought, I did it completely online, and the only experience I had with the dealer was when I went to the dealer to pick up my car. What a wonderful experience to remove the unpleasantness of the process. Right? And the same thing is true on almost anything that we're dealing with. And I'm going back to what Renee said, the security and making sure that we can do that properly, because yes, we're always going to be attacked, right? Where there's money, there's going to be people wanting to attack it, and we have to give that security. But we also have to make it a pleasant, the word I sort of dislike, a delightful experience.
No, I get that. And it sounds like you're saying that the ability to deliver a delightful or richer experience to the end consumer, at some level, it ends up being established by the level of capability or the sophistication of the identity solution that they're using. Because a lot of, I think a lot of people are going to themselves, well, we've been thinking about doing something to improve our, our capabilities, and 2020 forced them to go, man, we got to make a decision. And if they didn't make a decision in the last few months, they really know they got to make a decision now to start measuring up.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure that it's the sophistication of the identity solution. It is the business with a commitment to identity, right? There's a reason that you want to go where everybody knows your name, right? Cheers had an appeal because everybody knew Norm, right? The thing that we're looking at is that identity is that core component that you have to have in order to build a rich relationship between the customer and the entity, right, or the business. And the more we know about the customer, the more we can see if the customer is acting strangely, or we can be aware of what the customer is going to want to purchase or how they're going to want to work with us, and build that relationship, right? It was really interesting to me. I have a prescription that expired today. The last one I took this morning. Yesterday, I got a phone call. Now, it was a phone call, but I got a phone call from my pharmacist saying, hey, your prescription's expiring. Do you want another one? Preemptively, not even with me going in to ask for it, and just saying, hey, by the way, we need to do this. That makes me feel good. That is a relationship that says, hey, someone's watching out for me. And that exact same piece where identity is the important aspect is where winning happens, right? It's the sophistication of the identity system, but it's about letting identity be pervasive within the entire enterprise, the entire business, the entire transaction.
And I want to go one more on that. It's not only that initial, to Allan's point, but where I think that we get really good at is once you set that expectation, if it goes away, that's what, this goes back to the commitment. It's really easy to do the first time, the second time, the third time, but then when systems change, things go, you've got to do upgrades and whatnot. Maintaining that same level of commitment to identity is critical, because the minute that my pharmacist quit calling me and I got all screwed up on my prescriptions, I started looking for another pharmacist. So it is very important.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to probe on this example, because in Canada, obviously our pharmacies, people choose their pharmacies with ease. There's 4 of them within a block of here. But the doctor is a different situation, and then the connection between the doctors is something completely different. And I'm actually interested in this. That exact example you gave. I've got a really weird thing happen to me this year during COVID. My family doctor, or my personal doctor, is quite ill, and there's no one at his practice that's responding to any requests for renewals of prescriptions. I was really excited because the Ontario government has rolled out the ability for me to do virtual doctors, and I went online and signed up for this experience, and the person basically was within 10-15 minutes was on a virtual chat with a doctor, and I explained my predicament, and they said, well, I can't write you a prescription for that. You need to go into a real doctor, because I don't know your history. I have to take your blood pressure and the whole thing. I said, okay, that's fine. I've been on this drug for 5 years, but that's totally legit. You don't know me. I said, the problem is I don't have a doctor. And they said, well, call the pharmacy and they'll be able to refer you to a clinic, a walk-in clinic. So I went to the walk-in clinic, and they said, we don't have any spots open for people to walk into, but give us your phone number, and then a doctor will call you at home and write you a prescription. And so after walking down to the walk-in clinic where I didn't want to get exposed to COVID, I walked back home. A doctor that had never met me called me and listened to my story, and then called the pharmacy and called in. No, I have no idea who any of the people were that I talked to, because there's no sense of identity. And I'm trying to figure out, as I unpack the system here, who needed to be investing better in an identity solution or into an experience than in this whole situation. Whose responsibility is it here?
I smile and chuckle when you tell that story, Aaron, because that what it sounds like is a system that for the last 30 years, healthcare has been incredibly focused on, protection of personal information and managing the relationship, yada, 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 yada. Now we get COVID, which is suddenly, in an emergency, none of the rules matter. And the reality about it is that in this case, your priorities actually did shift a little bit from having that personal relationship with your doctor to actually having to get the prescription. And although by no means is that a good way of doing it, ultimately, perhaps the first doctor could have done that and avoided the walking. But the point is that, when we come into an emergency where old processes don't work, we have to, change around and try and make things work. And very often, most of the time, those new processes are suboptimal. Healthcare is a really interesting challenge because it is about the relationship between the patient and the doctor. And, that we've made that to be a core component of the healthcare. And you ran into
the liability issue, right? I mean, that doctor that refused to write the prescription initially was obviously part of it was thinking about their liability and didn't want to write that prescription.
Right.
And so to that, like Andrew Marshall just wrote in and asked, do you really need to know your doctor is? I don't really, but in the case that there was actually a miscommunication about my prescription, someone needed to be able to follow up that doctor to find out why they wrote what they wrote. And so there is a need to know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you look at the US medical system, the abuses that have been done over that very issue, right? Yes, you needed to get a prescription, but the other side of that could also be, and there's an awful lot of people who may not need a prescription that are getting them because they are jockeying on the system. And I don't know who needs to invest in that. Probably society and all of us. I don't know that I can answer your basic question.
I want to push on this, because Allan, who's going to write you a check and say, help us fix this? In that scenario, do you think in Ontario? Because someone's going to write a check and work with someone like you, Renee, or you, Allan, or someone else, and figure out, is that going to be the...
Well, I think that you hit on, little feedback there. I think you hit on two key pieces, and Allan said in emergencies, process is suboptimal. And we know that whether it was not, going all the way back to 9/11 when we were dealing with that emergency, or, and systems and security were down. But when they're suboptimal and people just want a lot of reliance goes into the goodwill, that's when the bad guys come out. That is first and foremost, the social engineering, all of that stuff comes out. So there's that point. But at the same time, I think what's unique about this particular example is we haven't gotten out of emergency yet. And so what we thought was emergency, and then we were going to go back to normal, became our standard. And so now, again, as always, we are playing catch up to where we are going to have to be afterwards. And to your point, Aaron, I think that the question around who owns it, liability, who is, just like anything else, who's willing to be more, who's more risk averse, who's more willing to accept risk, and depending on the liabilities in the U.S., with medical, with healthcare and whatnot, and lawsuits, it becomes a big issue. If the government gets involved, then we're heavy in government. So it's a very unique problem that we have. And I agree, someone needs to stand up and fix that model. And sometimes it's the pharmacies. On our side, it's a lot of times the pharmacies to protect themselves.
Now, I can see that. What's interesting to me is what the pandemic is showing us around what the next 5 years are going to be like. Because and maybe you can take the floor on that for a bit, because I think, Renee, you brought up a lot there when you said, like, we're still in emergency mode. We're just starting down the path of catch up. So what do the next 5 years, we'll call it 5 years, I don't know what it is, of catch up look like?
Well, I think one thing, let's table healthcare specifically for a second. But I think one of the things that we're watching, especially, I live in Southern California now, but I'm Silicon Valley, most of my life in Silicon Valley. And right now I was talking with our CEO recently, and he said 3 of the 4 people who live next to him have all moved out. We are accepting, because they're moving to other places. What used to be a tried and true culture of, even though we believed in remote employees, the idea of bringing everybody together, in fact, I miss it, that bring everyone together and talk and get things working, has significantly changed. We have a much more global economy and global workforce. We are accepting, Twitter kind of set the stage, but we're all accepting that we are going to be working at odd hours, at odd locations, on odd days. And this idea that, the idea of an office and what an office is very different than it used to be. And I don't think we're going to see us go back to that. I think what we're going to see is more and more emphasis on the ability for me to do my job from anywhere at any time and access anything I need. You can't ask me to continue. There are certain applications we used to say, oh, you can only access it if you're on the corporate network. How's that going to work now? There is no corporate network. So adding that level of security. Allan, I know you've seen it. Obviously you're way older than me, so you've seen more.
Well, Renee, back in the 1800s, we used
1918 pandemic. Allan, what did you guys do then?
We just buckled down and we supported, yeah. But going on what Renee says, right? It's actually really interesting, because nothing that is actually happening now is actually brand new, right? We've been doing flexi time, and we've been doing remote workers. Heck, I was a remote worker when I worked at Apple back in the late 80s. So it's not new, but what we had was 5% or 7% of our workforce would be remote. And if you had a good relationship with a good manager, you could be remote. Interestingly enough, my partner works at General Mills, which is, a big food producing company, and they have a policy that if you are at a director level or above, you work out of Minneapolis. That is your office, and that's where you work. This year, they now have 3 people at the VP level that are not working out of Minneapolis. Now, is that going to continue? Who knows? It's a, there's reasons that people move around. But I think that the idea that work is going to be specifically tied to geography is going to become less and less of an issue. It'll still be there. There's still absolutely, as Renee says, good. I love getting around and talking with people and the personal interaction. But one of the things that I would really hope, and we've seen this come to play politically in the US this year, right? There is very much both a social and an economic divide between the places where work and business and high tech is happening and where it's not. And in fact, if you looked at the map on November 5th, you could see exactly where that was. So, one of the things about it that we're looking is, where are the boom cities right now? People from, as Renee says, from Silicon Valley are moving to places like Idaho and Montana and, New Mexico and places like that, which are traditionally, and I know it sounds so horribly elitist, but are traditionally the flyover states. Right? These are the ones that, there isn't a lot of stuff happening. And I think as a digital infrastructure becomes more and more trusted, more and more normal for many people, the ability for some of those, let's call them geographically disenfranchised communities, to be able to participate in the digital economy probably goes up. Right? And I don't know, it's an interesting thought, but over the next, 5 to 10 years, do we see a little bit of a normalization of moving away from the big tech cities into sort of more spread out across the country, globally?
I can see that. I mean, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, and on the internet, no one knows if you're based in Halifax or in Toronto or Shelburne or Antigonish. I'm with you. It's interesting, the ramifications of potentially another wave of migration out of cities into areas that are not, a lot more inexpensive, as long as the IT, as long as the internet coverage is what we need now. Because I'm sitting in a house with 3 kids that are all doing virtual school, and my wife's doing virtual work, so we need a pretty good bandwidth and connection here, and more importantly, it needs to be reliable. Even if it isn't super fast, it needs to be reliable. And so I can see that potential. And then there's an interesting question to look at: are we going to see another wave of that movement outside the borders too? Because people say, listen, if I can work anywhere, why am I working at -6 when I could be working at 26 degrees in Barbados right now? That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Right.
But of course, the internet connectivity is not good enough to do that in those countries.
So, interestingly, Aaron, as you were saying that, the thought that came to my mind was of the railway barons back in the middle end of the 1800s, right? That was fundamentally.
You knew personally.
I knew them personally. We used to have dinner every Friday night, but the discussions that they would be having would not be very different than what we're having now. Right. And the reason the railways were put into place was to give that reliability and the communication and the transportation into place. The internet and the things that we have with that is sort of exactly the same thing. It's just solving sort of a slightly different problem. And we've done wonderful things in getting high-speed internet around to significant parts of the country, to significant parts of the world. Not the best. There's still lots of work to go, but I think that that's part of it. And it's a changing reality. Is it going to be that way for everybody? No. Right? There's still going to be people that insist that we have to go into the office and work. And there's going to be some jobs, that's what you've got to do. However, in general, across the economy, I think it's going to be more acceptable if you have something that fits the profile, that maybe geographically diverse is not as taboo as it was.
Is it going to impact where people choose to live or the types of communities that they want to live? I mean, like everyone has faced their mortality to a certain level this year and said, you know, I've got X number of years left on the planet, knock on wood. You know, what am I going to do with it? Where do I want to do it? Where do I want to invest that time?
I think what we're going to find is a couple of things. I think that, you know, you actually hit it very well. I think that what I've seen, work-life balance and that appreciation of time. Well, there's an appreciation of time with family, and then there's the, oh my God, I can't do another conference call with my kid running around naked, you know, kind of thing that we've all faced, but or hopefully understand. You know, I think that what we are seeing and what I'm seeing is people want to focus on what's important in their lives. They are much more focused on things that impact their ability of, you know, going back to what we started this conversation around. I don't want to spend 20 minutes trying to figure out how to log in and pay my bill when I could be doing something else that's more fulfilling. The fact that I've been unable to go out to the national parks and go hike and do the things I enjoy doing, I do not want to be stuck behind a screen on my time trying to figure out how to do something. I want to be out in the world and out in the woods. And so I think from a business perspective, what I see is this absolute need, to focus on customer interaction and making that customers or your employees, because of attrition, you know, you want to make their experience not delightful, but make it so it's a non-issue. Oh yeah, I got to go through that. But also what I'm also seeing is a lot of people wanting to go off and dream their dream. They're like, you know what? I've got an idea for something great. What's stopping me from doing what I want to do? And I think there's a lot, this has opened some doors. People that got, you know, COVID may not have been nice to them. They were in the entertainment industry or the hospitality industry. A lot of them I've seen go off and say, you know what, I'm going to go do something else, and I'm going to start and do what I want to do. So I think it's an interesting way we're going to see in the next couple of years of businesses homegrown.
I'm concerned, Renee, because I look around and I look at, you know, them going, well, if the U.S. government can't keep themselves secure and the City of St. John can't, you know, I have an idea for a business. How do we layer on, you know, we're all being challenged right now. We're facing challenges we've never faced before, more work to do's list that we can handle. How do we add identity service planning to that list, to these people right now? How do we dump that on them?
Okay, so I think there's a couple things. And you know, first off, when you look at what has happened, when you know, and I've been in security for pretty much all of my career, brief stint in big data, but overall, you know, in the reactive side of security and identity. And one thing I will tell you, with the exception of denying service, so websites going down from a denial of service outbound, okay, where somebody attacking from outbound, credentials are the key to everything. Literally, when you look at what happened in the government, there's an article going around about the SolarWinds and Duo access and access to the A key in Outlook. It all started because somebody had administrative credentials. And, you know, so when it really breaks down to it, to do those kind of attacks, you're seeing those very sophisticated attacks where backdoors are put in and nothing happens for 6 months. I was involved in the Office of Personnel Management hack several years ago. And those things, it all came down to patients and administrator access. So those fears are mitigated when you have an identity solution, not only for your customers, but you have an identity solution for your employees or the administrators as well. And that's what, you know, that's what we, you know, at ForgeRock and a lot of companies out there, that's what we focus on, is ensuring that this is no longer something that you need to panic about. It's like plugging a plug into an outlet. It's there, you use it, and you don't sit at home and worry, am I going to have enough power to run my TV or my internet? Well, unless you're in Southern California, but you know, you don't worry about those things. You know, we know it's there. All we got to do is plug into it, and we just keep doing our jobs. Allan, are you going to add anything to that?
I'm absolutely going to add something into that. And the piece that I'm going to add into that is that it actually shows why identity is so important. Because identity at the core is the definition, going back to what I said earlier, it's the definition of the relationship. And, to each and every one of us on the call here, it would be very difficult for somebody to impersonate your spouse or your partner, because you have a bunch of things that you can recognize them by, and they have certain behaviors, and they have things that you can very quickly determine that that's not who they are. And the same is true in the relationships that we have with our customers. The more context that we can have a look at, the more we can start looking at, even if credentials are compromised, there's still the idea that says, this person has the right credentials, but they're not doing what they normally do. Something weird is going on here. Honey, what's wrong? Right? and that's really the thing where identity helps us. Right?
I don't want to talk about it.
Fine, just fine.
Everything's fine. Yes, but that's the level of insight that knowing the relationships ultimately ends up giving us. And I know that that's sort of an interesting analogy, but that's what we get to is knowing the identity.
But I want to go back to, I appreciate that. I want to go back to what Renee was saying. Is basically the idea is that you don't have to think about this. If you have a great idea for a business, or you're working in a financial services, and you're working in healthcare, you don't have to go out and plan this on your own. There are a number of players that are out there that can help you make that transition, or help you make investments. And it doesn't have to be like a big, massive investment at the start. What you're saying is that there are people now that can help you actually take this off your plate.
Absolutely, right. And
so
people
has an excuse for not doing it.
People who that is their job. Right. And so when you sort of think about it again, I'm nothing if not the king of sort of looking at ways we can look at this. But when we start looking at when you're building a business, you don't start training security guards if you need the building protected. Right. You go to a security service and you hire services. You don't start trading janitors in order to keep the building clean. Right. You hire a service. And the same is true about identity. You should be able to hire a service from people whose job it is and know all of the things that need to be done in order to try and make it safe, because that's how you're going to be most effectively able to deal with that. People who do this day in and day out. I've been thinking of building a cabinet in the living room. And, the more that I think that I can do that, the more that my partner says, really? Can't we just hire Alex to build it? He does such a good job.
Okay. So you're helping, I think, give us a sense that we don't have to try to do these things ourselves. That we can rely on on people that are experts in this. But let's talk about so that handles a bunch of the investment, or the fact that people are not taking steps forward. But let's talk about the amount of money you have to have and the space to put it. Are we talking about on-prem solutions, or is the future all in the cloud? Like what's happening in these types of scenarios these days?
So I think what we have found is, and I say we as an industry, I was in cloud. I'm almost as old as Allan. I was around when cloud was oh my God, don't even come talk to me about cloud. I was in cloud 15 years ago. And probably some would argue longer than that. But the core of the business now has moved forward. There will never be a time where on-prem goes away. It's a fact of life. But even when I say on-prem, okay, I'm talking about managed, business managed, privately managed by you, to Allan's point, where you've trained everybody, you've got a data center, even if it's in the cloud and Kubernetes or whatever it is, but you manage top to bottom stack. There are going to be some applications like that. There are going to be some industries, whether it's the government or whatever that may be. But on the other hand, I think that we're going to find cloud becomes more and more, again, back to this idea of making it easy and not having to think about it. Another nice little thing that I like to talk about is, we know 2 years ago, there were over 250,000 pieces of malware mutated daily. And because of that, those malware pieces look for vulnerabilities in the OS. Managing the infrastructure is becoming unmanageable. Getting in front of the attacks, again, that's another thing about identity. But the long and short of it is, if you have to manage those things, and if you have to manage that infrastructure, you are taking budget, time, and resource away from your ultimate customer because you're focused on an area that's not rev generating now. It is just there for maintenance. You could take that infrastructure budget and that time and that effort and allocate that into product and code development for your customers. So I think on-prem and then even in hot will always be there, but I think a lot of people are looking at hybrid right now. Some some in the cloud, some out. But ultimately, it comes down to what your business risk appetite is, but also where's your budget and where do you want to spend your money on budget?
Presumably, most people are saying these days they don't want to invest in their own hardware and their own IT team and trying to hold those people and keep them from going to Shopify
Right.
for more money. They're saying that I want to invest in something that someone else will manage for me and finding a good partner to do that. Okay.
Yep.
And this is not unusual, right, Aaron? We've done this throughout the industry all along. The very first class that I did in IT or in the IT space was learning how to replace a disk drive into a PC, and what size screws need to be taken out and put in. We don't do that anymore, right? We move into newer technologies, and the cloud is really just how do we move away from physical boxes into virtual boxes for our processing power.
So you're saying the Raspberry Pi that I bought for my kid for Christmas was a complete and utter waste of investment?
No, that is the piece of on-prem that we were talking about that'll never go away.
I was just thinking about teaching building blocks. Okay, so I don't know how many of you there are, Allan, but you seem to be everywhere, and you're not even in Canada, so I'm not exactly sure how this is. How many, you guys are active in a lot of stuff, and you're active in a lot of stuff here in Canada, even if you're not enjoying the cold with us here right now. So what's going on in Canada that you guys are active in? You guys have some clients up here and you're doing a bunch of work in the community.
Absolutely, right. So, ForgeRock is a global company, and the problems of identity are everywhere, right? Whether it's in the UK or in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, God forbid in the US. So it's all over the place. And yes, I have a soft spot in my heart since, after founding Vancouver, Washington, George Vancouver went up to Canada and went up there as well. So there's a soft spot in my heart for that. So yes, ForgeRock is a member of the DIAC, which is in Canada. I'm on the board, and we've been working there on the trust framework and the Pan-Canadian trust framework and things like that. Generally, for me, it's simply a point of I'm passionate about identity and want to try and help people look at ways that we can make this safe, make it trusted, make it easy to use and convenient, right? All of these things need to happen together. And so, yeah, whenever there's something that's going on with identity around the world, you'll probably find Allan there.
All right, so the big work that you've done last year here in Canada and the work that you're looking forward to doing in 2021, what should we expect within the work that you're doing in the DIAC?
So within the DIAC, I think that the trust framework is now is various parts of it are complete and other ones are getting very close to that. And
can I explain what that is for a second?
So the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework at a very high level, I don't want to go too deep into it, but at a very high level, it is basically a way for entities within both the public and the private sector to be able to trust each other's identities, or to be able to trust identity across outside of the scope of any individual enterprise. And so, can you use, although we've seen this in the physical world, right? You can use your BC driver's license to rent a car in Toronto, but you don't have the similar kinds of things when you start doing digital. And the trust framework is really there to say, how can we work with multiple organizations and across Canada, and for that matter, across the world, but let's try and do it across Canada to start with. And so, ForgeRock has been active inside of that. We've been working with the PCTF to ensure that we are able to deliver and things like that. And yeah, we do have a bunch of customers across Canada who are, working and trying to deliver that and work within that space.
Awesome. I want to turn to some of the last questions that people have been putting in. I've been trying to weave them in here, aside from some of the joke comments here. One of the questions that was asked is, and I'm going to phrase it, change it slightly different, because Carlos first asked, why is Canada taking so long to be on par with jurisdictions like Estonia that have benefited from the program?
Can I answer that one?
I'm going to say what's different about Canada versus Estonia. Maybe we should go into that a little bit.
I can jump into that one for a fairly quick explanation,
Oh.
right? And the difference is that when you look, it's the relative size of the jurisdictions. Estonia, as a country, has 1.2 million people in it. It's sort of the same size as IBM, as an enterprise, right? And it's the same identity problem as an IBM badge. When you look at Canada, you're talking 35 million, you're talking what, 12? How many different provincial jurisdictions? 12 or a whole number of them. We have multiple financial institutions. We have a whole layer of complexity on top of that is considerably more complex than the Estonia, the Singapore, the Norways, that really it's simply a single authority. And so Australia, Canada, these are both very similar. If you look at the UK, it's a little bit bigger. They're at about 70 million, but similar kinds of challenges. So it's a much bigger problem with much more or a more diverse set of stakeholders that have to try and deal with it. And, it's the problem of government. And then, of course, you get to the US where they haven't even really started trying
let's
to get
just
that
hold
right.
it right there. No, there is one other thing, and you brought it up earlier, Arne, and that is when you go digital and digital economy, you've got to have access. And so the lack of geographical access is a huge problem. In fact, the other night, my daughter was outside with her babysitter, and they both came in pale because they had seen 20 stars lined up in the sky, and they were floating, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared. And she freaked out thinking it was alien invasion because it is 2020 after all. And it turned out to be Starlink. And so seeing Starlink and that grid of trying to build broadband, but I think that overall what I'm finding is it is different provincial, the government, it is size, but we cannot ask people to become digital and digitize their lives if we're not going to give them the tools to do that. And right now, I think, aside from every other thing that the United States has got wrong right now, let me go ahead and apologize to everybody for that. Still waiting for California to be part of the Canadian Baja. But if we could find a way to fix that, then we can begin to look at that. But I know with remote learning right now, we have millions and millions of children in the US that don't even have access to a computer. How can we ask those families to turn around and then be a digital economy? So that's one of the reasons that we, as an industry, you see these smaller countries in these more compact areas able to do it. But then you also get into the fact that, no matter what, if one side says something's good in the US, the other side is going to hate it, no matter, even if it's air. So
what's really interesting on that, Renee, is that we actually brought the original founders, like the drivers, the architects, from Estonia. We brought them over to Canada maybe 3 years ago, and they spoke at Identity North. And what was really interesting was I stumbled into a question that I didn't realize that I thought I was giving them a lob ball. I said, so talk to us about how this has opened up access to the less fortunate and those that haven't traditionally have access. And that his face went gray, and he said, we don't talk about that. And I said, what do you mean? And I thought it was going to be a great good news story. And he said, oh no, anyone that was disenfranchised, that didn't have access to services before, we've just written off. We just don't provide them services. They cannot access and participate in society. I said, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
You just write them off. And he said, no, we just haven't come up with a solution to engage with a certain percentage of our population. And so when we ask the questions, why is Canada taking so long to be on par with jurisdictions? It's because I think we're trying to be proactive, and we're not willing to make those trade-offs. And we are not willing to just say, fine, we'll write off those people that won't participate.
Well, if you look in the U.S. at the recent, you look at the swath of the center of the United States. our agricultural areas, many of those people, you're talking about, geographically, a third of our country does not have adequate service in the United States. So while, I think that personally, I think Canada, compared to other countries, far and above better in many countries, especially US, we've got it right now. We have to worry about some other things. But generally speaking, I have seen that the Canadian world, I work a lot more with Canadian partners and with Canadian teams that are, we're very active, and they're very much about standards and making it better for everybody. But I do believe that we have to address the disenfranchisement of a large swath of population without access. We're going to have to do something about that before we can say we're successful in transition anywhere.
I think it's a great note for us to end on, because we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to give everyone a chance to do anything that they need to do before they get back to their work. Allan, Renee, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a great way to wrap up 2020 with a spirit of commitment to focusing on making sure that this is going to work, not just for those that have access and have the privilege of having things work out for them, but for everyone. We know we have a lot of work to do. You've given me, I think, and probably a lot of the viewers, a sense that there is a path forward here that doesn't have to be about, okay, I got to hire a bunch of guys to sit in the lab to figure this out for me, that there are people that I can talk to. And I said guys specifically because I'm finding it also really positive that our last event, we had 62% of the speakers were either female or members of minorities. And I think it's been really one of the best parts of 2020 for me has been seeing a really significant increase in the diversity of voices, the diversity of perspectives, and the commitment to making sure that this is going to work across society, at least within the Canadian community. And that gives me a lot to be really happy for and looking forward to. We're going to follow up on this conversation because we're also recording some stuff for the podcast. And so please keep an eye on the podcast, everyone. You can subscribe to the podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you download your podcast. As I mentioned, we've announced the dates for the 2021 calendar of events in advance. They're all available on IdentityNORTH.ca, February, June, and October. Those dates are all posted, so please come on. And as I mentioned, the early bird pricing ends on December 31st, and you should be thinking about me and Krista and the Identity North team, and Allan and Renee, and how we're all going to be together in February. As you're counting down New Year's, give a toast to Allan and Renee for generously donating their time today to help us prepare for the positive attitude for diving into 2021.
2021 is going to be awesome.
Thank you, Aaron.
Talk to you all soon.
Thanks,
Okay, bye-bye.
Oh.